On March 20, 2019, a 64-year-old French defense employee was performing his run-of-the-mill duties when his work colleagues broke the news about a surprise gift, which they prepared for him, and for that, they got special approval from the Ministry of Defense. The surprise was a discovery flight on one of the French Air Force 70 million pounds twin-engine, twin-seat Rafale B. No doubt this was an amazing gift. Most of us would love to spend a fortune for a supersonic flight, but he was not too keen for any adventure like this. Keeping in mind that his friends did lots of efforts to get this approval, he didn't say no, and reluctantly accepted the offer. The fact that he was only a few hours shy from the flight gave him cold sweat. His medical checkup was done 4 hours before the flight. If one goes by the book, it should have happened 10 days before the flight. He was declared fit to participate in the flight by the doctor, under the condition that he would not be submitted to a negative load factor. He also limited the G factor to +3 for the passenger, but this information was not communicated to the pilot. After the medical examination, a briefing was given to him regarding the safety and precautions. He also been told how his ejection seat works, but as he was already confused and stressed, he was miles away from the briefing, which later on proved very costly. As he entered the cockpit, his heartbeat was 136 to 142 according to the fitness watch he was wearing, which was way more than normal. And he was so disorientated that he didn't check his safety equipment properly. And the ground crew, who was assisting him to strap in the cockpit, finished his work hastily and didn't do mandatory checks. Not long after that, their plane was on the runway of the Saint-Dizier 113 airbase in eastern France, ready to take off, piloted by an experienced French Air Force pilot with more than 2,000 flying hours experience under his belt. The twin engine took off in style and climbed 47 degrees and generated a load factor of around +4 G. As the pilot leveled off and the jet was subjected to a negative load factor, which can create the feeling of being upside down. This is where problems from the harness not being tight enough contributed to the accident. In the state of unbalanced, the passenger searched for something to hold onto. Unfortunately, that something he went for was the ejector handle. He saw the handle and swiftly grabbed it. As these handles are made sensitive to response, so the endangered pilot must be saved within no time, which makes sense in a war situation. If the jet hit by a missile or caught fire, the time window to escape is extremely narrow. Going back to the incident, after grabbing the ejection handle due to lack of plane's knowledge, the ejection process activated instantly. There was a loud bang, the glass canopy blown away first, and then the passenger was ejected from the plane. His parachute opened after that. In the ejection process, his helmet went flying in the air, which is visible in this picture, which means his helmet was not securely attached. Fortunately, the man escaped serious injuries after parachuting to Earth in a nearby field. A lucky malfunction at the time of the ejection saved French Air Force a jet. The Rafale B's command ejection system is meant to fire both seats at once, which didn't happen in this case, and the pilot was still in the cockpit, but there was a fear that the ejection could happen anytime. The pilot acted calmly despite all the drama. He dumped fuel and made an emergency landing. He immediately jumped out of the aircraft since his ejection seat was fully armed, and the ejection sequence, which was already activated, could have happened at any moment. A thorough inquiry was conducted after the incident. Here are the findings of the inquiry conducted by the French government, cataloging a comedy of errors that led up to the incident on March 20, 2019. The Dassault Rafale B was one of 3 jets participating in a training exercise. The man's colleagues had obtained ministerial approval for him to be taken for the ride-along. According to the investigators, he felt a huge amount of social pressure to accept the gift. The investigators also found that the inexperienced and stressed passenger was mostly in charge of securing himself in the cockpit. The passenger was not cross-checked by the ground crew and had not tightened the harness adequately on his own. He had also not donned his G-suit pants correctly, and his helmet and oxygen mask were unbuckled. So it went flying in midair when he was ejected. Neither the passenger nor the pilot had been told that the doctor who examined the man recommended he not be subjected to a negative load factor. The reason for the failure of the pilot's ejection seat in the escape sequence was reported as the explosion from the initial rear seat ejection ruptured the casing of the sequence selector, which supposed to trigger the pilot ejection seat. Investigators concluded that the error was caused by an involuntary reflex prompted by stress and the jet's sudden movement. Several recommendations for passenger flight operations were made based on the findings of the accident investigation. These included allowing an adequate interval between medical checks for the flight and the flight itself, and the completion of the checks to make sure the passenger candidate is mentally and psychologically prepared for high-performance flight in tactical aircraft.